Hello and welcome to TidyX episode 73. TidyX is a screencast where we go through and explain how our code works. My name is Ellis Hughes. You can find me on Twitter at Ellis_Hughes.
And my name's Patrick Ward. You can find me on Twitter at OSPPatrick. And TidyX is on Twitter at tidy_explain. And it's also on Gmail at tidy.explain@gmail.com. Of course, you can always go on the YouTube channel, watch the show, like, subscribe, add comments, add questions, or you can go to our GitHub repo where you can access all of the code for the shows, as well as take out an issue if there's something you'd like to see. We love and appreciate all feedback.
Yeah, definitely
Good or bad.
definitely take a moment to subscribe. We release stuff every week. I think pretty great content, and I think we've got a really good one cooked up for this week. Patrick, what are we doing this week as I go to share the screen?
Yep. So we've been working with our SQL database of NBA data that we curated from our friends at probasketballreference.com. And last week we built a Shiny app that showed home margin of victory over time from 2000 to 2015. And that's cool. You know, you got your Shiny running off the back end of your database, and that's pretty fun. But here's the thing. We create a database because we're going to want to continually populate that. You might be working in an environment where you're scraping web pages and putting data in. You might be working in an environment where you've got APIs coming into your database and creating tables. You might be working in an environment where you've got both of those going on.
Yeah.
And so what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to give your user the opportunity to get the information that they need from that database without worrying about, is this the newest version of what I'm looking at? So we want our Shiny app to be able to look at the database, produce our plot, but then within the server, be able to look at the database again and say, wait a minute, has anything changed here? And if it has, give them the new data. And so we can set that up to do that on a sequence or a cadence of time, depending on when the data is coming in and how frequently it would need to be refreshed. And so that's what we're going to go over today.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge strength of databases, the fact that multiple people can be editing the same it's not a document, it's a database. So there's usually multiple users on there, and giving the power to your user to not have to, restart your Shiny app or anything like that, where it's just while they're in it, they have the most up-to-date data, and they don't have to worry about is it containing the most recent, or it's nice.
That's right.
All right. Choice. All right, so let's get this thing started. There's a lot of historical code here from the last several episodes. If you want to check those out, we've been talking about databases in SQL since episode 70. So definitely go check those out. We'll add a link down below. So we're going to load a library, tidyverse, rvest, janitor for data cleaning, manipulation, and scraping needs, dbplyr for giving us explicit connection to our database, as well as our SQLite and dbi. And those are the functions that do the connection and communication between R and our SQLite database. And then, of course, we're working with Shiny. So we need library Shiny and Shiny widgets to provide a very nice widget for us.
A picker for
widget
us
to do it.
Yeah.
So we made that nice. All right. So we did this in episode, I believe, 71. So we're not going to go over this, but this is a function that pulls seasonal information from the Basketball Reference website. Thank you again, Basketball Reference, for hosting all this wonderful and very rich data in a very consistent format. It makes our lives much easier. This is slightly different in that we are only going to pull seasons 2001, 2014 for reasons to become clear later.
Yeah.
And so we've already run that. This takes a while to run. So this already exists. We already have our database over there. So then we disconnect. The reason we do a lot, we got asked last week why we have connections and disconnections everywhere. It's to try to limit the number of connections we have to our database. We don't want them floating around. They can become stale, and then it's just kind of good practice to not leave your connections to the database, just because the more connections that exist as more users are on your database, that could potentially cause issues and slow it down. And so we want to be nice to our DBAs and not just have not useful connections to our databases. All right, so now we're actually going to get into some code to create our Shiny app. So first, what we need to do is connect to our database It's the same way we're connecting it with DB Connect. The driver that is the underlying the way it communicates is we're using our SQLite package in SQLite, the driver. This is the location of the database, and now it's connected with the dbcon object. That we're going to get the list of tables that exist here, and they're all, and in this case, they are all season tables. That is not always the case on your databases, so definitely keep an eye out for that. And then we're going to get the actual season number here by using the wonderful parse_number function that exists in readr. So these are the actual season numbers. And then we're going to get the list of teams that exist, because teams can move around, they get added, they get removed over time. So here we want to get the list of teams that exist in our database. And so we use the db-get query. We're going to select the from each season the home teams. So we're assuming also that every team has been at least the home team once. And then we're going to take a union of all those to get us a unique set of teams. So in this case, there are 36 teams that have existed between 2001 and 2014. And then we're going to disconnect again. So now we have the seasons that exist, the year, the actual specific year, and then the teams that exist. Now we can build our Shiny app to do the things that we want to do. Patrick, do you want to take us through this piece?
This user interface hasn't changed much from last week, with the exception that we added a slider. So basically, we're setting up a user interface that's going to be a fluid page, and we just give it a nice little descriptive title so that the user knows what they're looking at. The sidebar panel, we're going to have two panels in this Shiny app. The sidebar panel, where the user inputs the things that they want to know about, and the main panel, where the output of whatever they input comes out. So in that sidebar panel, we've got a slider. So these are fun little sliders that basically take two endpoints, a minimum and a maximum, and allow the user to slide. Usually these are great for time series type plots, which is what we're doing and which is what we did last week. So we're going to take from our data set the input ID season selection. We're going to call it for the user. We're going to say, hey, select a season or select seasons. Inside of the slider input, you have to set the max and the min. So in this case, we're going to take the max of the table, the largest value, which was 2014, and the minimum value, which was 2001. And then we're going to concatenate those together in value. That's what's basically going to allow the user to see on the slider timeline where they can move between. We do a bunch of stuff here, like to make it look pretty in terms of the ticks and the separation and stuff like that. Those are more like aesthetic things. You could really pretty much cut the slider input off at everything above that. At value, you could pretty much cut it off and you'd be okay. So just some things to make it look pretty if you're interested. The picker input is what we had last week, and this comes from the Shiny Widgets package. So the picker input is just a cool way to allow for this handy drop-down to show up of all the options, and then the user can select and deselect different teams. We don't do a select all here because there's 30 teams, so it would look kind of messy. But there is an argument within the picker that gives you the ability to select all or deselect all. But here we're just going with the input from our database is going to be the home team. We're going to give it a label called, hey, go ahead and pick teams, user. The choices is going to be teams, which we just did above by identifying the unique teams within the database, seasons. And we're going to allow for multiple. So we set multiple to true. If you only wanted to allow for one, you just set multiple to false. And it might actually even default to false. I can't remember. And then selected, we're going to pick the Cleveland Cavaliers because it's just the best franchise in the NBA. And then our main output, our main panel is going to be a plot output that we literally give the descriptive name PLT. Nothing fancy there. It's just going to be a ggplot output. So we'll go ahead and run our user interface.
So now we've got our UI.
We're moving to the server. All right.
Go for it.
But let's take a look here. So server, the only thing that's changed here from the server, and we've done this before on a few different ones, a few different Shiny apps previously, but the thing that's changed here is this session argument within the function. So traditionally, we'd run a simple Shiny app that would have an input and an output. But we had to add session here because we want to literally update the Shiny session with new information as new information comes in. So we're going to use that within the observe events to say like, hey, if anything's changed, update the session for the user, that kind of stuff. So we're going to put that in there as our function. And we're going to start out with this available seasons. We're going to create this available seasons data set. So this available seasons data here is going to be a reactive poll. So reactive poll is a handy little function that basically creates a reactive object within Shiny, and it polls whatever the heck it is we're looking at. So in this case, we're going to be looking at the data, the database, but could pull other data sources. It could be looking at a folder that contains CSV or Excel files or whatever you might have. In this case, it's going to be the database. And the interval is going to be the time at which we want it to look at this database. So for the interest of time, we set it to look at the database every 5 seconds so that we don't get overwhelmed with time. But if you have data that maybe comes in daily, it might be, you might run 24 hours. If, for example, let's say like NFL, right? There's only a game every Sunday, unlike the NBA, you might have this just run like every Monday morning at 6 a.m. or something like that. Or, you might not have it checked so frequently. So it just depends on what the time scale of your data is.
Exactly. Or if you're working on something that's constantly updating, you might want to be pulling every like 2 seconds or something like that. Exactly. I mean, within reason. So there's also, of course, the limits of your system itself that you want to take into account. And so maybe set it at one thing that sounds right to you, and then assess after a little bit, hey, am I getting enough? Is it keeping up to date? And is it really pulling a lot on my system to be doing it like this?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
There's a couple things you gotta suss out there.
Yeah. So we set up our interval that we want the poll to happen in, and we're going to update this session. And this reactive poll takes 2 key functions. The first function is a check function, and this is basically checking to see if anything new has arrived in the database at the interval of time we're looking at. So basically, we're saying, hey, check function, every 5 seconds. Peek at the database, so reconnect. So we set up our connection there again. And of course, on exit, disconnect. And it says peek in the database and see if the list of tables has changed. Has anything new happened? And then after that check function runs, the value function says, hey, if there's new stuff, go ahead and grab it. So we reconnect to the database. On exit, we disconnect from the database. And then we take a look in that database. There's new stuff. So we're going to say, hey, pull any new seasons. And then also if any new teams have changed. So remember, we're looking at season level data here. So it's possible that if a new season comes in, a team has moved to a different city, or an expansion team has popped up or something like that. So we're just saying, hey, every time you look in the database, you run that check function. If there's new information, value function, go ahead and grab that, and then grab the new information and put it in this handy dandy list, because now that we have that data in this reactive object called available seasons, we're going to use the observe event to update our session. So Ellis, why don't you take them through that?
Sure thing. All right, so observe events are an interesting function inside of Shiny where you can pass one or multiple reactives, and if any of them change, it's going to then trigger the code that you list afterwards to run it. So it's kind of like your reactive element where you're looking at the inputs from the user. In this case, it is looking to see if there's any changes in the data that already is within your system, and then it triggers something. So here, what we're wanting to do is, if we notice that there's new data in our database, we want to be really updating our user input abilities. In this case, we're not actually going to be changing what's being presented to the user in the sense of what they've already selected. It's just going to add to the, I'll just go through this so we can step through it. Alrighty, so update picker input. So what this is saying is when this gets triggered, we're going to update the picker input with the input ID of home. And so this is our only picker input. The session is going to be the session that we're currently working in. And the choices, so those are the options that people have. Before we had it be the vector of teams. Now it's going to be looking at the teams that are available in our database, because this can update and change over time. And then selected, we're going to allow it to keep what was already selected. We don't want to undo what the user had already selected. So we're going to allow that to be kept the same. We don't want to override what they did. Next, what we're going to do is we need to update the number of seasons that are available, because we've added, in theory, if we've added a new season to the database, we want to give the option to our user to be able to select that as well. So here we're going to quickly parse out the number of from the available seasons so that we actually get the actual numeric value so that we can put it into update slider input. We're going to select the ID season selection to update that selector or slider input. The session is going to be the current session. The maximum number that they can then pick is going to be the maximum number of seasons that exist. The minimum is going to be the minimum number of seasons that exist, because it could be that this is a database that we built around a couple seasons, but now we're deciding that we want to expand it, and there could be historical data going backwards, and then there could be new seasons that we hadn't added yet into the database. And so the idea here is it could potentially grow in both directions. And then the value is also going to be keeping the original value that was selected by the user. We don't want to, once again, undo what they did already just because we updated the available data.
Which is like a horrible thing. If the user is like looking at something and then they're caught looking at it in the middle of an update, and everything that they were looking at or had selected gets refreshed.
Especially if it's like a series of clicks.
Yeah, that's awful. It's awful.
You want to, like, whenever you're designing the Shiny app, try to keep in mind that you do have users, and they don't like things changing unintentionally.
Exactly.
In the middle of their selections there. All right, so this observe event is now going to update our Shiny and update the options for selection for our user without actually changing anything else for them. And the rest of the Shiny is exactly like last week.
That's it.
That is the nice thing about doing this, is really you don't, once you've created your Shiny app to work how you intend it to on one, you can, if you might have to spend a little bit of time thinking about it, but you can set it up so like the rest of your Shiny app doesn't really have to change.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I spend a lot of time building Shiny apps, and I would say that's great advice. It can be overwhelming to think about the intricacies of all of these things. So usually the way that I develop is I develop a very simple Shiny app, and I get everything arranged on the page how I want it, and I get the information I want. And then once I'm good, I go back and I bolt on this piece of like the reactive poll, look at the data. And then literally all I have to do is go down here and change the inputs to the SQL data that I've just repolled, right? So that's usually the good way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the same reactive as last week, where it's going to connect to the database. On exit and completion of the reactive, it's going to disconnect from the database. It's going to pull the seasons. I guess this is the new piece here, where it's based on the user input as opposed to just naively grabbing all the seasons that exist.
Yeah.
But that isn't a huge difference. It's going to query each table, filter all the cases where the home team is the home team we actually care about, and then calculate, and that's then the data it pulls, and then calculates the mean or the margin of victory, and then calculates the mean of that to get each team's mean margin of victory across each season. And then it generates a plot where it's the same as last week, where it's looking at season on the x-axis, y-axis is the margin of victory, and it plots each team. So if you want to learn more about that, watch last week's episode.
Yeah. Let's run it and watch it update. Yeah.
Let's do it.
Make sure you pull your second R session over. So
yes, I will do that. All right, so this is the Shiny app that, like, more or less we created last week. The new thing is the slider input that we can change the years, because last week it was just all the data we had. But maybe there's a situation where they only want to look at a couple seasons. But now what we're going to do is demonstrate how it might be updated. And I'll try to put this on the right-hand side here so you can see it updating. I'll move our thing down there, and then I will bring in my second R session, and I'm going to copy and paste a bunch of stuff in to a new R script. So give me a second while I set this up. And there we go. There's that one. And I want the Shiny app over here. Alrighty, let's just create a new blank R script here. So I copied and pasted it out of the script we've been working on. So you'll know, you'll see the code that we're running here. But functionally, it's the same as like our first half of it, where we're bringing a bunch of libraries in. We're bringing in the function that pulls in the season data. We're connecting to the database. But in this time, we're actually going to pull seasons 2015 through 2021 to demonstrate how updates to the Shiny app will populate it based on updates to our database. So this is connecting to the same database that this is connected to. We're now going to we're going to walk over seasons 2015 through 2021. Oh, there you go. See, 2015 has been added. It takes a little bit for it to run because there's a couple of different things going on. First, there's the code to actually pull down the HTML from Basketball Reference and add it to our database. And then there's also the polling that we have set up here. But as you can see, it's actually relatively quick, where it doesn't take that long for it to be added. And
also notice the user I selected 2001 to 2011 date range is not changed.
Yeah, because we don't want to undo the work that they did.
Yeah.
To do that. There you go.
There you go. You got it all. Yeah.
So now that's done running, and we can now expand.
Select whatever. Yay.
Into those new years. So there you go. So now we can literally, this is all the new data that we just added here, and so Cleveland. So best franchise, huh?
Listen, let's not talk about those years.
But yeah, so this is how you could interact with your database and set up your Shiny app with your database to make sure it's grabbing the most recent information and showing to the user what the most recent information is.
Yep, that's pretty cool. So we have a reactive Shiny app with a reactive database, all pulling information, populating a database, and allowing the user to access the new information as it comes in real time, which is super cool.
And I guess we didn't go over this too, but we this team picker also, or I mean, we touched on it when we were going over the code, but we didn't demo it here. That the like the Brooklyn, I guess the Brooklyn Nets are in here, but.
Yeah, there they are.
If any teams were added, they would now be selectable in here if they didn't exist before 2014.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so
Sweet.
I think with that, we're going to call it. I'm going to stop the sharing of the screen so we can do our proper sign off here. Thank you all for joining us today. As always, my name is Ellis Hughes. You can find me on Twitter at Ellis_Hughes.
And my name is Patrick Ward. You can find me on Twitter at OSPPatrick. Tidy Explained is on Twitter at Tidy_explained and is also on Gmail, tidy.explained@gmail.com. You can go to the GitHub page to access all the code from the prior 72 episodes, including this one once it's up. And you can also open up a issue with us and ask for something new or something you'd like to see, ask a question. Otherwise, you can watch the episodes on YouTube, like and subscribe, and drop questions and comments there. And we love to hear from you.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us for 73 episodes. Keep on exploring your world.